Hey everybody, welcome back to A Matter of Life and Maiden, the podcast of the Beast. I am Joe Labriola. And today, in episode 42, we are talking about the godfather of Iron Maiden on his birthday, March 12th, 1956, his 69th birthday. Happy birthday, Mr. Stephen Percy Harris. Again, March 12th, 1956. Steve Harris. Happy birthday, Steve. This episode is very special because Steve is, as I said, the godfather of Iron Maiden. He is the founder of Iron Maiden, founded Christmas Day, 1975. And, going back to, some of the stuff about Steve, he originally wanted to play drums, and then he realized that, a drum set or a drum kit was going to be too big for the amount of space he had at his residence at the time, so he decided to start playing the bass. And aside from his triplet technique, which is unbelievable, Steve Harris is my favorite bassist of all time, by far. His songwriting chops are, as Matt said in the podcast many times, and we've both said this about him, genius. He is a lyrical genius. He is a music composition genius. He's also a co-producer, and he produced a lot of the albums in his own studio that he used to have. Some of the stuff in the 90s that wasn't that great. To lesser effect, but co-producing with Kevin Shirley since the reunion. So he plays keyboards as well. He's an avid soccer player. He, football in every other country besides the States. He loves West Ham United, as you can see on his bass. He has the team's crest and everything on there, the team's emblem. Keyboards, too. Started playing keyboards in the 80s on Somewhere in Time, and then even further on Seventh Son, and then Michael Kenny came in to fill in for the live stuff. Just, the guy is unbelievable, and without Steve, we wouldn't have Iron Maiden. And he is a member of the band who formed it in 1975, and he's been with the band, never leaving since the inception. Dave Murray is the second longest member in the band. He got kicked out for, I don't know, not that long. Not even 6 months, I believe, or 3 months, or whatever it was, and he came back almost immediately. Steve and Davey are the only two members of the band to have been on every single studio recording and live recording in the band's history. It's pretty impressive when you think about that. Studio recording, live recording, DVD compilations, videos, everything. And Steve is the driving force. He's the creator of this majestic metal band we know as Iron Maiden. And another thing about Steve is, if you go back several episodes, I did a three-part video where I ranked all of Steve's epics. His solo pen-written epics from every album, and I ranked them. So if you want to go check those out, I highly recommend it. This is going to kind of be like an encapsulation of that, kind of a summation of some of that stuff, with some additional tidbits here or there. But for Steve's birthday, I just want to make it known that he is Iron Maiden, and he was the generator, the creator, and he's still with the band. He's still steering the ship. I will say, and we're going to talk about it here down the line in this episode, you can see album to album how he kind of was in sole control. And Matt and I sort of talked about this in the individual album review episodes that we did several years ago. But he kind of lets go of some of that control and lets other guys come in. And I think, kudos to him, because that's kind of what Iron Maiden is now. And if you go back, I've done an episode now for Davey's birthday, for Yannick's birthday, Adrian's birthday, and now Steve. And I kind of talked about their writing credits and their contributions throughout Maiden's discography. And, had Steve still continued to be that kind of quote unquote, I'm the leader of the band, I'm in control, and never gave up any way of that, never gave up any of that freedom to the other members, who knows what would have happened. But you'll see. I mean, it does sort of, in a way, take kind of a dark turn and kind of explode on him and erupt on him kind of negatively in the 90s. You'll see, especially when Adrian leaves. And I think now Iron Maiden is, Steve will always be credited as the driving force and, the sole reason Iron Maiden exists. But Iron Maiden, I've said this before, nowadays is all six guys. All six guys. And you have to have every single one of them, because that's the band. That's the band now. And in the 80s, it was the five-piece. It was the five-piece lineup. And what I mean by that is, let's just jump right in. So, going into the original album, and I want to say this about Steve. Steve, for the most part, in the corpus of Iron Maiden works, the body of their entire work, he's pretty much either written solo or co-written 80 to 90% of their material. 80 to 90%. So with that being said, without Steve, you don't have 80 to 90% of Iron Maiden's material. I mean, that's pretty damn substantial and significant. So keep that in mind. But you'll see what I'm talking about when I talk about him letting go of some of the creative control and letting other band members kind of put their input in and kind of working with them and tailoring it with them and then getting their feedback and, just them being a cohesive unit. But Steve always has a say in like everything, every song, every mix, how it goes, how it sounds, for the most part. Unless somebody comes up with something and it's like, damn, all right, yeah, that's a single. Or, yeah, that's amazing. Let's use that. So, the first record, the crown jewel of this album, is Phantom of the Opera, and I talked about this in those episodes I was talking about when you're ranking Steve's epics. This is kind of an encapsulation of the entire record, so to speak, and almost a premonition of what the band would look like 20 or 30 years later. It's just, the thing with Iron Maiden is this is stuff Steve had in the bank. He had this stored up since he was writing the music. And with the Iron Maiden record, you can see, if you're looking at the two Deanna records, for instance, Iron Maiden and Killers, you can see how this one has more of a progressive, and dare I say, epic, quote-unquote, edge over Killers. The production isn't quite as good as Killers' production, but if you're looking at it in its totality, from that kind of standpoint, this album is absolutely epic in every sense of the word. And everything about it is signature Steve. It has Steve's imprint on it. Phantom of the Opera is one of the most amazing Iron Maiden songs of all time. When Matt and I did rankings, I think we put this on the top 3. It's like number 3. Behind Hallowed Be Thy Name and Around the Ancient Mariner, or flip-flop them, according to Matt and I. But this entire record is just magnificent for what it was, and this is the genesis. And Steve writes damn near everything on this album besides Charlotte the Harlot, which is credited to Dave Murray. The only full solo writing credit Davey ever had. Everything else is Steve. Everything else is Steve. And then moving on from that, when you get to Killers, same thing. I mean, pretty much everything on the record is Steve, and then he has a couple, writing credits with Paul Di'Anno. But not like I said, 80 to 90% of that record is Steve. Then you go to Number of the Beast, and you're looking at Hallowed Be Thy Name, that jewel of a song, and that entire record. And again, the majority of that album is written by Steve with a couple co-writing credits with other band members, but those first 3 records are Steve, 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 Steve. It's all Steve for the most part. All Steve. And when we're talking about epics, like I said, some of the greatest songs in the Maiden catalog. Phantom of the Opera, on Killers. I mean, the entire record, damn near, almost. Go to Number of the Beast, you got Hallowed Be Thy Name. Songs like that. that entire record, Run to the Hills, all of the title track, and pretty much every damn song on that record. I mean, you have just him. Him and Clive wrote a song on that too together. They collaborated, but I think Gangland. But at the end of the day, it's pretty much all Steve. You know, and Adrian has a writing credit on there, here or there, interspersed. But again, for the most part, it's the majority of it is Steve. Now, again, moving forward from that, you go to Peace of Mind, and this is where Steve, Nico joins the band. This is where Steve kind of is backing off a little bit and letting other members kind of give their input. And it's kind of revealed in the name of the album itself, Peace of Mind, like it's a piece of everybody's mind. What does everybody think? Hey, let's sit down and have a discourse and a discussion and a debate, or just, let's brainstorm here and see what topics or subject matter we all like, and let's just make a record about it. And I think that's why Peace of Mind is such an amazing record, because everybody kind of contributes. Nico, not so much. I mean, his playing is obviously the hugest contribution he gives to that record, and it's immense, and it's amazing, and it's masterful, and I love it. I.e., Where Eagles Dare. Look at that. Look at that freaking amazing opener. That album is amazing. But everybody's starting to contribute here. But The Trooper, obviously one of the most iconic Iron Maiden songs of all time. That's Steve's. And then To Tame a Land, based on the Dune novel by Frank Herbert. Just an amazing epic in every sense of the word. Like, if you want to hear Steve's playing and how he freaking gallops, listen to The Trooper, listen to Peace of Mind. Peace of Mind is that record that really, really, I mean, he's getting down and dirty now. At this point in time, this is the 4th record he's on. He's like, yeah, we got this. And the absolutely monumental shifts in that album, where there's something for everyone. I talk about this all the time. From the opener, Where Eagles Dare, to Revelations, to Flight of Icarus, to Die With Your Boots On, to The Trooper, to Still Life, to Quest for Fire, to Something Still, to To Tame the Land. Like, everything about the album is unbelievable. And it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I really hope we see To Tame a Land on the Run for Your Lives tour. I think that's the one song from this record that I would love to see live. And it really showcases just the power of this band, even so early on. And that's what I love about Iron Maiden. Steve Harris is one of the most prolific songwriters in rock and metal history, in my opinion. I mean, he's up there, and honestly, he's my favorite. He's at the top of the list for me. But he's up there with, like, Ronnie James Dio, and from the stuff he did with Tony Iommi and Sabbath, and the stuff he did with Richie Blackmore and Rainbow, and then his solo career, obviously Dio's solo career, and albums like Holy Diver and Last in Line, etc., etc. And Ronnie played bass too. That's another thing. Ronnie was actually a bassist before he he sang too, but he ended up making the full switch, the full turn to just straight up singer, being a front man. But Ronnie could rock on the bass too, and it's interesting just getting that rhythm section down. For Holy Diver, he was playing the bass line, and that's how he wrote the lyrics. So some kind of connection there with Steve. Other writers that are amazing. I mean, Rob Halford from Judas Priest. I mentioned Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull, one of Steve's influences. Only Ian uses a flute and acoustic guitar. And Nico has said this before about Steve. He plays the bass like it's a guitar. So, like a rhythm guitar. And, if you've been listening to Iron Maiden for any length of time, and you kind of digested their music, you can clearly hear that that's the case. I mean, he's the driving force behind this band. He's laying all the groundwork and he's building the brick wall up, and the guys are just adding extra stuff on it. Extra mortar, extra paint, extra stuff, putting the cherry on top. It looks beautiful. And the ivy starts growing on it, putting a nice fence up, and it becomes a historical landmark. That's Iron Maiden. They're a fusion, in my opinion, in the best of, like, prog rock from the 70s, which they're hugely influenced by, or art rock from the 70s, and the darker metal movement that would come after the fact, like, bands like Black Sabbath. It's a perfect melding of, I mean, if you take, like, in my opinion, Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull and you take Black Sabbath and mix them together, you get something kind of sounds like Iron Maiden. And it's absolutely unbelievable. And then obviously they have their own unique style with the guitar attack and all this other stuff. But, I'm going off on a tangent. But going back to Peace of Mind, talking about that and kind of what I said, the album encapsulates all that stuff I just mentioned. Because there's such a variety on it. There's such taste on it. You can hear the prog rock in it. You can hear this new kind of sound at the time that you probably never would have heard with a new wave of British heavy metal. With what is this stuff? It's heavy, but it sounds proggy. I can hear Yes in here. I can hear a little Steve Howe. I can hear a little Rainbow. I can hear a little Ronnie James Dio. I can hear a little Ian Anderson. I can hear a little Wishbone Ash. I can hear a little Thin Lizzy. I can hear some UFO. Like some Shankerisms, right? You can hear that stuff. So yeah, that's just Steve. That's what he brings to the table. That's his vision. And if you look, he clearly all the guys really, but Steve in particular, they clearly, and Steve, wears his influences on his sleeve in these albums, but makes it something different and new and fresh, and that's what's so beautiful about it. He melds the styles together to make Iron Maiden. That's what Iron Maiden is. Iron Maiden is quote-unquote a metal band, but if you really look deep into their songs and their structure and how they play, they're very, very progressive for what they are, and not prog metal like Dream Theater where there's all these really wild solos and stuff, and I love that stuff too. It's amazing, but Maiden keeps it tamer in a way where it sounds almost like 70s prog rock with a heavy edge to it, which is the metal part. That's why I love them so much. And listen to Peace of Mind, you'll see what I'm talking about. Moving on from that, Power Slave. What's his crown jewel on this? Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. It's my favorite Iron Maiden song of all time to this day. March 12th, 2025, on Steve's birthday. I'll say it again, his 69th birthday. Steve, thank you for writing Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. It's the most amazing song ever made, in my opinion. This is me, and maybe I'm biased, and I love Zeppelin, and I love Stairway to Heaven, and I love Pink Floyd, and I love all those Runner records, and I love Yes, and I love all these amazing bands, and Rush, and I love Tull. And, shout out to Jethro Tull, Curious Ruminant just came out, amazing record, listen to it. Anyway, with that aside, oh my god, Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is the perfect example of what I've been talking about on this tangent for the last 5 to 10 minutes. When I was talking about all this melding and all these things. This is where Steve hits the jackpot. It's just a perfect piece of music. It has introductory spoken word elements in it. It has actual phrasing from the poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge in it. It has amazing instrumental transcendent passages that tie things together. So many movements, so many shifts, so many different ideas that come together perfectly. It's a perfect song. It's absolutely phenomenal. And the Power Slave record, again, Steve giving up a little bit of creative freedom, and Bruce writes Power Slave on this, and Flash of the Blade. So, it's amazing because it's only upward from here for the next couple of years for these guys until we hit the 90s. And brilliant, just a brilliant record, one of the greatest albums of all time in rock and metal history, in my opinion. Steve is a genius, and listen to his playing on this. The slow part, and when it comes back into then the spell starts to break. Dun, 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 dun. You hear his bass, kind of, it almost is storybooky kind of feel, and adds the accentuations. It's beautiful. Then getting to Somewhere in Time, Steve and Adrian are pretty much responsible for this record. Everybody else was just dried up, and they were yeah, Power Slave, man, World Slavery Tour kicked our asses. We are freaking burnt out. And Steve's yeah, but we gotta churn some shit out here. Let's try something different. Adrian picks up guitar synthesizer. He starts using that, and Steve's yeah, let me try some keyboards. Let's try some keyboards, some synth. Let's see what it sounds like. And they create the amazing Somewhere in Time record with, again, mostly Steve's input and Adrian's on this. But Steve's oversight. He sees everything. And Alexander the Great, what a phenomenal what a phenomenal song. And having seen it live now, oh my god, like another one that brings tears to my eyes when I think about it, because I saw it live. And I'll say this, I didn't see Future Past tour with Matt last year. It was the first concert in the 20 years plus that I've been listening to Iron Maiden that Matt and I have been listening to Iron Maiden together. We did not see a show together. And it's interesting because, just him, like I've said this before, him and I are as close as we used to be. He has a family and stuff now. We don't really talk as much anymore. We don't really talk at all, to be honest with you. So it's kind of sad in a way, but it's also beautiful at the same time because I got to see it and it was amazing. And I saw it with my girlfriend and she loved it and she was like, "Oh my god, it was amazing." She's a huge Dio fan and she was like, "Wow, this is phenomenal. These guys are absolutely phenomenal." And I was like, "I told you, closest thing to Dio that you're going to get." And for me, Maiden's above Dio, right? But Dio and Maiden for me are neck and neck. And again, relating back to Steve, that same kind of energy where you're taking progressive rock and those ideas and melding it with this new kind of metal sound and also throwing in some kind of like historical and emotional textures, and you're actually singing about stuff that matters. These aren't love songs or things like that. This is like actual pertinent information. You're singing about science fiction. You're singing about philosophy. You're singing about life, history, those kind of things. That's the beauty of this band, and that's what Steve brings to the table as a writer and as one of the greatest of all time. And you see that in Somewhere in Time. You see it in Seventh Son too. Moving on, like this album for the '80s is the most progressive thing I will say that they ever did. It was the most experimental album at the time for the '80s. They overhauled it with a concept album. Again, Steve's idea. And just a really kind of obscure, out there kind of theme, and I think it's awesome, and it's organic, and there's nothing like it. And while I've said this before, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son isn't my favorite Iron Maiden album, it's still a phenomenal record. It's still excellent. It's still damn good. And the title track is absolutely stunning. It's absolutely stunning. It's some of the coolest experimental guitar work and like progressive instrumental guitar work the band has ever done on any record. Any record. And this is kind of where, in my opinion, like Seventh Son, they're at the height of their prog era. Take this album, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, and stack it up against some of the stuff I was talking about with Dream Theater. Or stack it up against like Queensryche and like Operation Mindcrime, that record. Or stack it up against some Rush albums or some Yes albums or some Toll albums, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Like it's very, very storybooky kind of fantasy oriented in a way. And I love it. I love the record. And Steve does a hell of a job again with the instrumentation and the structure and how he composed everything and created everything. And yeah, like I've said this before on the podcast, the only gripe I have with the album is I feel like it's not as strong as some of the other '80s stuff. And the closer is Only the Good Die Young, which is not an epic, and they traditionally close their album for several years, albums with an epic. And for me, it kind of ends on like a kind of a low note, so to speak, because the rest of the album is phenomenal. But again, Steve, and then after this, Adrian leaves, and this is where Steve kind of, in the '90s, this is where he kind of, and then because Bruce leaves shortly after that too, but he kind of takes back some control again, tries to get back to the stripped down approach, and he probably thought it would work because, in his defense, even going back to some of the other guys I talked about, like, the '90s wasn't good for like classic rock or like that prog rock kind of style, or metal. Grunge was taking over, and pop punk and things like that were becoming a thing. Hair metal and stuff was a big thing. So like, it wasn't a good thing. So Steve thought, hey, maybe if we just chill out a little bit, go back to like the bare bones, stripped down version of everything, maybe we'll sell more records. And obviously that didn't work because you got No Prayer for the Dying, which was, in my opinion, the worst thing they ever churned out. The album has some redeeming qualities on it. I'm not going to say it's a total loss. It's Iron Maiden. They're amazing. But you stack that up against the rest of their discography, and I mean, you have to say it's at least, you know, near the bottom if you don't think it's the very bottom. I personally think it's the very bottom, but in my opinion, it's just there's nothing on it that even touches some of this other stuff that the one and only Steve Harris has composed and written in his career, or played bass on in his career. It's just the riffs aren't there, the song structure and the technical musicianship isn't there. The progressive edge is fleeting. It's not there. Maybe slightly, like on like Run Silent, Run Deep, you can kind of hear it. But the rest of the album is too tame. It's just like, it really is stripped down. Like, it's just like the album cover. It's a stripped down, watered down version of what Iron Maiden should be. And again, you know, I love Steve. He's amazing. But he had to go through this phase in the 90s, that album, and Fear of the Dark, too. You know, while Fear of the Dark is a step up, Fear of the Dark, the song, is absolutely kick-ass. And, you know, he wrote Afraid to Shoot Strangers as well. And one of my favorites on the record, honorable mention from Fear of the Dark, is Childhood's End. That song kicks ass. And that's an Arthur C. Clarke science fiction novel. It's amazing. If you haven't read it, read it if you haven't. But that's a really cool song, underrated on Fear of the Dark. The problem with Fear of the Dark is it's too long. And again, it's almost an identity crisis. You have songs on here that are really prolific and progressive, and they sound amazing. And then you have these short, almost, you know, dare I say, like, this is really radio-friendly shit, like Wasting Love. That song is like, what? What are you guys doing? I'm not saying it's a bad song. But, like, in the prism of Iron Maiden, like Matt and I talked about, like, what else did they do in their entire discography that sounds anything like Wasting Love? Nothing. Like, it's not... There's too many ideas. There's too many ideas. And they don't synchronize together the way they should. But Fear of the Dark, the title track, is absolutely phenomenal. And then, you know, it's a song that has all that stuff I talked about, with, like, Around the Ancient Mariner. It has all these really cool movements, and like Seventh Son, a lot of instrumentation, really great lyrics, really enchanting musical ideas that lull you in. Like, that's Iron Maiden. That's what it should be. And then when we go to the X Factor, you get Sign of the Cross, but Bruce is gone now, and Steve is going through a divorce, and it's like he's writing about all the dark shit that happened in his life, and you can tell that he's really taking a dark turn. The X Factor is an underrated record, I'll say, too. You know, give it a chance. Everybody kind of says the Blaze albums are the worst, but I beg to differ. I think you had Bruce Dickinson, arguably, you know, at the top of the conversation up there with Dio, probably as the greatest heavy metal singer of all time. And you turned out No Prayer for the Dying and Fear of the Dark, two lackluster records as a whole. You know, they do have some gems on them here or there, some good songs on them, but especially Fear, not so much No Prayer, but then you get to X Factor and everybody's like, well, we don't like Blaze. So it's like, well, listen to Sign of the Cross and tell me that that's not a kick-ass song. It goes through all the same stuff we just talked about, all these amazing passages, all these different musical ideas that just sync together, flow together effortlessly, and it's perfect. It's an amazing song. It's an underrated gem in the Iron Maiden discography, primarily because Bruce didn't record a version of it on an album. But they played it when they got back together for the reunion on the Rock and Rio DVD, and they just played it on Legacy of the Beast a couple years ago. And it was like the highlight of that show. So if you haven't checked out Sign of the Cross yet, it's one of Steve's greatest musical compositions that he wrote. And it has everything that I'm talking about here that defines Steve Harris. Great lyrics, great musical movements, great composition, great song structure. Everything is intricate and perfect, and it just sounds phenomenal. Listen to it. And, you know, giving Steve credit to go through this stuff. Virtual 11 rolls around, and he writes The Klansman, another really cool kind of epic song. Not quite as much as Sign of the Cross, but it has this epicness to it. And that album kind of returns to this futuristic vibe that we saw kind of like in Somewhere in Time. And, you know, kind of tries to explore virtual reality in a futuristic vibe again, which is really neat. And Steve's playing, I must say too, like on every single album though, is damn good. Even on No Prayer, the weakest record, you know, he's still pretty kick-ass. Even though I will say that he chills out too much. Like he's not bringing fresh new stuff at that point in time, like, or stuff that he should have been bringing. And it was within him this whole time. He was just trying to do something different. And I think that's another thing too. I think when he went to the stripped down version, he wasn't being congruent with himself. He was incongruent at the time, trying to please whatever fans or whatever, trying to please the music scene or whatever at the time. And it didn't work because it wasn't really him. And then you see Fear, he tries to improve again. X Factor, he's like, F this, I'm going to write what I want. Virtual Eleven, same thing. Let's explore some ideas. And then I think much like with Killers, with Paul Di'Anno, he kind of saw the limitations of writing with that kind of sound and that singer and that voice. And he knew what he could do with Bruce. And that's kind of when it was like, okay, shit. When that happens and Virtual Eleven's out the window and they basically say, hey, Blaze, we love you, you're a brother, but at the end of the day, like, we just need to get Bruce back. Like, he's just amazing. We need him. We need to write, like, in his range. And then you see what happens. Like, Brave New World, Dance of Death, A Matter of Life and Death, The Final Frontier, The Book of Souls, and Senjutsu, 6 records since they got back together in the year 1999. The writing credits for Steve on some of those songs, wow, and some of those records, man, I'm just going to do a little highlight here and just kind of run through real quick. Blood Brothers from Brave New World, phenomenal. The rest of the writing credits or co-writing credits Steve has on that album, unbelievable, an amazing record. Dance of Death, No More Lies, amazing. The rest of the co-writing credits on that record, like with Adrian and stuff like Passchendaele, Journeyman, Face in the Sand, and Bruce, amazing. A Matter of Life and Death, one of my favorite Iron Maiden albums of all time. For the Greater Good of God, wow. Just absolutely stellar shit on this record. The Legacy with Yan, Reincarnation of Benjamin Brigg with Davey, the Lord of Light with Adrian and like Bruce and stuff thrown in here, like Brighter Than 1,000 Suns, Adrian and Bruce, like they churn out this amazing shit now. And like I said, Steve kind of over the years, then these guys are trying to impress Papa Steve, Godfather Steve, and they're coming up to his level and they're working together to create some amazing fucking music, man. Because everything since the reunion has been pretty damn good in my opinion. Pretty damn good. Final Frontier, like When the Wild Wind Blows, an amazing song. An amazing epic. The stuff he writes with Adrian, again, and Yan, like The Talisman, Starblind, Isle of Avalon. I could go on forever. Amazing, some amazing songs. And I said this about Final Frontier, and I know that I've kind of beat a dead horse with this a million times on this podcast, but I'm going to give it some credit here because I kind of did it on the last episode I talked about. Final Frontier, whereas I would say Seventh Son was their most experimental album of the 80s, the Final Frontier is their most experimental album since the reunion, I would have to say. They tried to do something really, really different with that record. And it was almost like they were trying to mix Seventh Son and Somewhere in Time together, and they got Final Frontier. And, if you look at it that way, so many kudos to Steve and so many kudos to the band for trying to do that. It's an amazing record. And maybe I've been kind of harsh on it, not giving it enough credit, but I came from A Matter of Life and Death, which is personally one of my favorite records of all time in music history, to Final Frontier, which, it's a damn good record. It's solid. I love it. But when I hold that up against A Matter of Life and Death, and that's probably just because I'm being biased, but, A Matter of Life and Death is always going to win. But I can't sit here and say that album is not damn good. It's good and it has a different feel to it. But it's almost like if you were telling me, what do you like better, Somewhere in Time or Seventh Son? I'm going to say Somewhere in Time. It's just because Adrian, right? I mean, it's my bias taking over. Doesn't mean that they're better records. It's just my opinion. It's just what I like to hear, the kind of musical compositions I love. But I love them all. Iron Maiden's my favorite band for a reason. Like, I love their music. And it's because of Steve. And after Final Frontier, we got Book of Souls, The Red and the Black, man. I saw that song live. It's like a modern day Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner for me. Like, it's the modern day Rhyme. I mean, it's just an absolutely unbelievable song from beginning to end, and all the musical ideas, and it's like 3 or 4 songs in one. And there's so much stuff in there that harkens back to, like, you can kind of hear, like, and I don't want to say that Iron Maiden is ripping themselves off, but you can kind of hear, like, samey kind of sounding stuff, but it's a positive thing. You can kind of hear the Trooper in The Red and the Black, kind of like a gallop, Steve's bass. You can hear, like, bits and pieces of the heavier stuff from, like, A Matter of Life and Death. You can almost hear, like, Power Slavey sounds in it. You can hear Somewhere in Timey sounds in it. It's just a very, very awesome song that encapsulates everything that I love about Iron Maiden. It's one of my favorite Iron Maiden songs of all time, and it's on a newer record. Even though Book of Souls is going to be 10 years old this year, I say newer. I mean, but it's on their not their most recent record, but the one prior to that. And the rest of that album too, just the writing credits. Again, Steve kind of gives up a little bit of control, and Bruce has the opener and the closer on Book of Souls and If Eternity Should Fail and Empire of the Clouds. But what a record! What an absolutely amazing record! I love Book of Souls. I think it's phenomenal. And then Senjutsu, their newest release, this is where Steve shines. I mean, he has 4 songs that he wrote by himself on this, and they're epics. All 4 of them are epic songs. Like, there's no middle range rocker, there's no short song. It's 4 epics. It's 4 epics, and Steve's back, and he's like, "Yeah, I got 4 ideas here. We're going to use them." I mean, Lost in a Lost World, Death of the Celts, The Parchment, and Hell on Earth. Man, how amazing are these? I think Lost in a Lost World is probably the weakest. Then probably Death of the Celts. Then probably Hell on Earth. And my favorite is The Parchment. Parchment's one of my favorite Iron Maiden songs. And it's on their latest record. And that's another song, much like I was talking about with For the Red and the Black. And it's a continuation and an evolution of the epic stuff that Steve was doing in the 80s when he wanted to write almost like... The way I see Steve is like he's almost like comparing him to like a classical composer. Like he is Antonio Vivaldi. Like these epics he writes are like part of the 4 seasons. Like he is doing a concerto like Beethoven or Mozart. Like he's that guy. He's the conductor. He's the creator. He's the generator. He's everything. And we wouldn't have what we have if it wasn't for Steve. And that's why I love him so much. And again, I wish him a very, very happy birthday today, March 12th. And man, 69 years old. And it's crazy how these guys are kind of like all born in preceding months. I've done a podcast episode now for their birthdays like every month, like Davey in December, Yan in January, Adrian in February, Steve in March. And now we won't get anybody again until Nico's birthday comes up in June, and then Bruce in August. But it's very interesting to me and very cool. And my hat's off again to Steve and everything he's done. Like, man, Iron Maiden for me is just one of those bands where the music has literally just changed my life. It's everything. I was talking to my girlfriend today about philosophy, and she just got this really cool philosophy book she started reading about Stoicism. And like it's the first time she really touched Stoicism in a way that made sense to her. And it's almost like she was telling me, like it's almost like I can, what they're writing about is how I feel. Like it's almost like it's my worldview in this book. It's like how I think about things, how I feel about things, and they're saying it to me, and they're affirming my thoughts as like valid, my beliefs. And that's kind of what Iron Maiden is for me. They're a band, but like what they sing about, what they talk about, how they carry themselves, that's what they are for me. They're reaffirming themselves to me. And I consider myself as a syncretic philosopher. I was raised Catholic, and there are parts of that I love, and I still kind of follow that, slightly. But I'm a syncretic philosopher. That's really my faith and my belief. I think there's beauty in everything. Every religion has an underlying theme that can be related to another one. And it might not even just be religion, any philosophy, any mythology. Some of my favorite authors are J.R. Tolkien, and one of my all-time favorites. I love Carl Gustav Jung too, like psychology and archetypes and how we think as people. I also love Joseph Campbell. He's a mythologist, or he was a mythologist. He passed away, sadly, in 1987, but one of my favorites. Just all these ideas and how they're related to one another. And it's weird because if you look at Iron Maiden and what they sing about and what they write about, science fiction, history, philosophy, fantasy in some aspects, emotions, life, didactic principles in their music, like how to live your life, those kind of things. It just fits my philosophy, syncretism, perfectly. And that's they're part of that. When I say they made me the person I am today, it's because of their music, and it's because of what they did for me throughout my entire life that made me who I am. And I owe a lot of that to all the guys in the band, but, really Steve for creating this thing and making this thing and carrying it on now for 50 years. 50 years and counting. 50 years and counting. And that's why he is the godfather of this band, and he is the founder, the creator, and even some behind the scenes documentaries like Kevin Shirley's calling him, show Papa, like show Papa, like Arry, he's Harry, Arry, Steve, Harry. He's the guy. He's the guy. And he's involved in like every facet. He's sitting down and like editing down concert video and footages. He's the one who decided to make the Made in England documentary more particular, and like almost like a fan had a camera and was filming it, because he was like, I want it to be a more personal experience. I want it to be like something that captures the moment. He really cares about not only pleasing himself and what he likes, but also pleasing the fans and giving us a worthwhile experience. And for that, and for what he's given to my life, I'm forever grateful, because he does care. He really does. I feel like he really does care. He wants his music to mean something. Like, his legacy is amazing. I mean, this whole band's legacy is amazing. But he's going to go down in history as one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest, in my opinion. Like, he's the greatest for me. Like, the greatest. The greatest. And that's what I love about this guy, and that's what I love about Steve. So, again, everybody, thank you for watching A Matter of Life and Maiden, the podcast of the Beast. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, make sure you comment, and talk to me about some of your favorite Steve moments, some of your favorite Steve songs. Talk to me about his playing style. He's been using the same Fender P bass since the beginning, really. All the different colors and the variations it's gone through. Black, then it was sparkly blue with a mirror pickguard. Now it's like white with the blue striping on it and the West Ham crest on it, which is awesome. Steve has his own soccer team, like I said, he plays with. I think called like the Maiden Knights or something like that. He's just much like everybody else in the band. Like, he's involved in so much stuff. British Lion, did stuff with his daughter, played on some records with other people. Like, he's great. All these guys have multiple projects. Like, the creative juices in their minds are flowing, and Steve's the generator of that. Like, he's, when they say you attract people who are like you or like-minded, or you become like the 5 people you hang out with, like, that's Steve. I mean, everybody started hanging out with Steve and Iron Maiden. Now look at them. They're all super successful. They all have their own kind of businesses and side projects, and they're writing books, and they're in 1 or 2 bands. Iron Maiden's the main band, but they have like side things like Bruce with a solo career, Adrian with Smith Kotzen, some of the stuff he's done down the line. Just absolutely amazing. And thank you, Steve, for everything again. And I know I've said this like 10 times already on this episode, but you changed my life, Steve. You are one of the greatest of all time. One of the greatest songwriters, musical genius, lyrical genius. And thank you again. Just seriously, and I mean this. If you ever listen to this podcast, like, thank you so much for everything you've done. Not only for my life, but my friends who love Maiden and all the fans out there. Because I know that I can probably sit here and kind of say what they would say and speak for them when I say, you changed our lives. You really changed our lives in such a positive and meaningful way. Like, the gratitude we have is probably, it's unsurmountable gratitude. It's priceless, what you've done for us. So thank you so much. Happy birthday. Hope you have a good day. Again, thanks everybody. Up the irons. This has been Joe Labriola for A Matter of Life and Maiden. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.